Algebra 1. Today's notes are about absolute value equations. So you learned about absolute value at some point in middle school, but as a refresher, absolute value means the distance from 0 on a number line. So in our first example, we're saying the absolute value of x. So when we talk about absolute value, we use these straight lines to represent absolute value. So the absolute value of x is equal to 3. So that means on a number line, our distance from 0 is 3. So I can move 3 spaces in the positive direction and end up at positive 3. Or I can move 3 spaces in the negative direction and end up at negative 3. But either way, my distance from 0 is 3. So we would say our two answers here are x equals 3 or x equals negative 3. If my absolute value of x is equal to 2, well, that tells me my distance from 0 is 2. So I'm either moving 2 spaces in the positive direction or I'm moving 2 spaces in the negative direction. So 2 spaces in the positive direction gets me to x equals positive 2. 2 spaces in the negative direction is x equals negative 2. You picking up on the pattern that's happening here? So if the absolute value of x is equal to 7, x either has to be positive 7 or x has to be negative 7. Because I'm looking at my distance from 0, it's either 7 jumps in the positive direction or 7 jumps in the negative direction. But either way, that distance is 7. So when we start to look at this with some more challenging equations. So this equation says the absolute value of x minus 1 equals 2. So if I cover up what's in these absolute value bars, that tells me that my distance from 0 has to be 2. Well, I know if I have the absolute value of something and it equals 2, that either means I moved 2 spaces in the positive direction and I'm at positive 2, or I moved 2 spaces in the negative direction and I'm at negative 2. So when this says the absolute value of something equals 2, I know there are 2 possibilities. It either equals positive 2 or it equals negative 2. And in this case, it's x minus 1 that either equals positive 2 or negative 2. So once I've split this into the 2 possibilities, I can just solve this the way I would solve a normal equation by adding 1 to both sides. And x is equal to 3, or in the second equation, if I add 1 to both sides, x is equal to negative 1. So I have 2 possible answers here. And I can double check and make sure those 2 possible answers are right by plugging them both back into the original absolute value equation. So if I have 3 minus 1, well, that's 2. The absolute value of 2 is equal to 2. That makes sense. If I have negative 1 minus 1, that's negative 2. That's equal to negative 2. So that makes sense. So my 2 answers are x equals 3 and x equals negative 1. There's actually another way that you'll see answers written for absolute value. Because we have 2 different answers here, sometimes you would see this written as 3 comma negative 1 written in squiggly brackets. All right, for our second one, the absolute value of x plus 3 equals 10. So that means this stuff inside my absolute value bars has a distance of 10 from 0. So my 2 possibilities are that that stuff equals positive 10 or it equals negative 10. So if x plus 3 equals positive 10, I would subtract 3 on both sides. X is equal to 7. If that stuff is equal to negative 10, same algebra step. I subtract 3 on both sides. Then x is equal to negative 13. So my two possible answers here in squiggly brackets are 7 or negative 13. And if you plug either of these answers back into the original problem, you will end up with 10. All right, last one. Pause the video. Try this one on your own. I'll wait until you actually pause the video and try it. Think about what your two possibilities are and what your final answer should be. Okay, for this one, your two answers should be either x equals 26 or x equals negative 2. All right, these get a little bit more complicated, but not too bad really. So this time, the absolute value of 2x plus 3 equals 15. So I know if I cover up this stuff in my absolute value bars, it's saying whatever is in here has a distance of 15 from 0 on the number line. So my two possibilities are still that that stuff equals positive 15 or it equals negative 15. So I write my two equations. And now I just solve these the same way I would solve any two-step equation. My first step is to subtract 3 on both sides. The second step is to divide by 2 on both sides. My first answer is x equals positive 6. If this is equal to negative 15, same algebra steps, subtract 3 on both sides. So 2x is negative 18. Divide by 2 on both sides. So x is negative 9. So if I was writing this with my squiggly brackets, I would have 6 and negative 9 as my two solutions. All right, the last example. I want you to try by yourself. The absolute value of negative 2x minus 3 equals 5. So pause the video. Take a minute. Think about what your two possibilities are. And then solve both of those equations. So your two solutions here should have ended up being x equals negative 4 and x equals negative 9. So that's all of our notes for absolute value equations. This should be glued into your notebook onto page 11. And this actually isn't in your table of contents, so we'll have to add this learning target to your table of contents when I get back. You have a practice worksheet to complete. You don't have homework over the weekend. And if you have questions or you're stuck or confused, I'll be back at school on Monday, and I'll be after school Monday and Tuesday. Or you can schedule to come see me during advisory or your PLT.